When the morning sun slipped through the old lace curtains of Margaret's kitchen, the smell of burnt toast mixed with the faint hum of the radio. Her house was small but warm. Every corner carried memories of laughter, birthdays, and her late husband, Robert. For 30 years, she had lived here surrounded by the ghosts of happier days. Now, the only sound that kept her company was the ticking clock and the occasional ring of her phone, usually from her son, Eric. Eric had been her pride once, the boy who used to bring her wildflowers and say, "Mom, one day I'll buy you a big house." But those days were gone. Now, every time he called, his voice carried a different tone, polite, but cold, like a stranger, and each call ended the same way, with another request for money. "Mom," he had said last week, "Lena and I are short on rent again, just until I get my next paycheck." Margaret smiled even though her heart felt heavy. She always said yes. She had been saying yes for years. Yes to rent, yes to the car loan, yes to groceries. Every month, her savings grew smaller, but she told herself it was worth it. That's what mothers do, right? They help. That morning, she brewed her coffee and opened her checkbook again. The balance stared at her like an accusation. $1,342 left. She sighed, filled in another check, and whispered to herself, "He just needs time. He'll get back on his feet soon." But deep down, something in her chest tightened. A quiet voice she had ignored for too long. The voice that said, "He's not trying anymore." Later that afternoon, Eric stopped by. He didn't hug her like he used to. He just walked in, checked his phone, and muttered, "Hey Mom." Margaret had made his favorite pie, apple cinnamon, like she always did when he visited. He didn't even notice it on the table. "Did you bring the money?" he asked. That sentence, so blunt, so transactional, hit her harder than she expected. For a second, she couldn't speak. She nodded slowly and handed him the envelope. "Thanks," he said without looking up. When he left, the pie was still untouched. That night, Margaret sat by her window, watching the streetlights flicker. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and she felt a strange emptiness inside. She had spent her whole life being the giver, the helper, the mother who never said no. But now, she wasn't sure if anyone saw her beyond what she could give. As the clock struck midnight, her phone buzzed again. A message from Lena, her daughter-in-law. "Hi Mom, just confirming you'll help with the down payment this month too. Thanks." Margaret stared at the message for a long time. She didn't reply. For the first time in years, she didn't reply. 2 weeks later, Margaret received a call from Eric. His tone was cheerful this time, a rare thing. "Mom," he said, "guess what? We're getting married next month." Margaret's heart leaped. She hadn't heard him sound that happy in years. "Oh, Eric, that's wonderful," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Finally, sweetheart, I can't wait to help with the preparations." Lena's voice came from the background, soft but clear. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll keep it small. You'll love it." Margaret spent the following weeks floating in a haze of excitement. She went to the boutique downtown to buy a dress, pale blue, with lace sleeves, simple but elegant. She even bought new shoes and a matching purse. Every night, she imagined how beautiful Lena would look walking down the aisle, how Eric would smile when he saw her sitting in the front row. She cleaned her house from top to bottom, invited her sister, and even started saving an extra $1,000 as a wedding gift. But as the day grew closer, something strange happened. No one called her. No invitations came. When she tried to ask Eric about the details, he said, "We're still finalizing things. Mom, don't worry." Then, one afternoon, her phone rang again. It was Lena. "Hi, Mom," Lena said, her voice unusually flat. "Just wanted to let you know, Eric and I got married yesterday." Margaret froze. "What do you mean yesterday?" "Oh, it was a small ceremony, just close friends and family. We wanted something intimate." Margaret's hands shook. "But I'm family," Lena laughed lightly. "Of course you are, Mom. It's just that we only invited special people this time." Those words, special people, hit her like a slap. For a long moment, Margaret couldn't speak. She just sat there, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to the faint sound of laughter in the background, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than any insult. That evening, she saw the photos online. Lena in her white dress, smiling next to her parents. Eric, beaming, champagne glasses, flowers, dancing, a perfect celebration, except for one thing. She wasn't there. She looked at the pale blue dress hanging in her closet. She had spent $200 on it. She touched the fabric softly, and a tear rolled down her cheek. All the love, all the money, all the years, and yet, She wasn't one of the special people. The next morning her phone rang again. It was Lena. "Hi, Mom, the rent's overdue. Could you please transfer the money today? The landlord's threatening us again." Margaret took a deep breath. Her voice came out calm, steady, almost cold. "Lena," she said, "didn't I tell you I only help special people?" There was silence on the line. For the first time, it wasn't Margaret trembling, it was Lena. What do you mean?" she stammered. "I mean," Margaret said slowly, "you'll have to figure it out yourselves." She ended the call. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Power. The quiet, unfamiliar power of finally saying no. That night, she sat on her bed and cried again, but the tears felt different. They weren't from pain this time. They were from release, from freedom long delayed. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Margaret expected Eric to call, to apologize, to say it had all been a misunderstanding, but the phone never rang. She went about her routine, watering her plants, baking small batches of bread for the church, feeding the stray cat that came by her porch every morning, but every little sound, the creak of the mailbox, the hum of her phone, made her heart jump. She wanted to believe her son still cared. Then one morning, her neighbor Mrs. Coleman came over, holding her tablet. "Margaret," she said softly, "have you seen this?" On the screen was a photo of Lena and Eric at a fancy restaurant, celebrating their one-week wedding anniversary. The caption read, "So grateful for our new life together. Blessed to finally have peace and space for ourselves." Peace and space. Those words stabbed Margaret like glass shards. She realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. They didn't just forget her, they erased her. That evening, she sat by the window, staring at the lights across the street. The hum of distant laughter from young couples echoed faintly, reminding her of what she had lost. Then came a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find a tall man in a dark suit. "Mrs. Baker," he asked politely. "I'm Mr. Collins. I represent the Oak Ridge Property Group." Margaret frowned. "Yes, that's me." He smiled, a practiced smile. "We've been in contact with your son, Eric. He mentioned you were considering selling your house." The words hit her like thunder. "My what?" "Your house," the man repeated, checking his notes. "He said it was part of a family decision, that you were planning to move into assisted living soon." Margaret's heart froze. Her own son was trying to sell her home. She steadied herself, forcing a small smile. "I see. And what price was my son offering?" The man flipped through his file. $200,000. Margaret almost laughed. The house was worth at least 5 times that. Her late husband had built it with his own hands. Every wall, every corner, carried the memory of their life together. She looked Mr. Collins dead in the eye. "Tell my son," she said, her voice suddenly calm, "that this house isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Mr. Collins hesitated, but he not ever. Her tone left no room for argument. That when the man left, Margaret sat down at the kitchen table. For a long moment, she stared at the stack of unpaid bills, at the small box of her husband's old letters, at the framed photo of Eric as a boy smiling, holding her hand. She whispered to that photo, "Where did I go wrong raising you?" That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she opened the old trunk under her bed, the one she hadn't touched in 15 years. Inside were envelopes, deeds, bank records, and a small black notebook with her husband's handwriting. At the very top, a letter marked "For Margaret when the time comes." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter began simply, "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm not beside you anymore. I know you. You'll endure everything in silence until someone tries to take what's rightfully yours. When that day comes, don't be afraid. Everything you need to protect yourself is in this box. Use it wisely. And remember, people who mistake your kindness for weakness will regret it." Margaret wiped her tears, clutching the letter to her chest. For years, she had lived quietly, believing goodness was enough. But now, she understood. Goodness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. It was time to stop being the victim. The following morning, the air felt different, sharper, clearer, as if the universe itself had shifted. Margaret brewed her coffee, but this time there was no hesitation in her movements. The woman who had once been quiet, forgiving, and endlessly patient was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone ready. She placed the black notebook and the documents from her husband's trunk on the kitchen table. As she went through the pages, her eyes widened. Hidden among tax papers and old property records was a document titled Suncrest Holdings, Private Ownership Agreement. Her husband hadn't just been a construction worker, he had secretly owned shares, major shares, in the very development company that had built half the city. Her heart pounded. If what she was reading was true, she wasn't just a widow with a modest pension. She was one of the silent owners of Suncrest, worth millions. Margaret picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in over a decade. "Hello, Mr. Bradley," she said, her voice steady. There was a brief silence before a deep voice replied, "Mrs. Baker, I was wondering when you'd call." They arranged to meet that afternoon at the Suncrest office downtown. When Margaret arrived, heads turned. The receptionist, expecting another retiree lost in the wrong building, straightened up as soon as she saw the glint in her eyes. Mr. Bradley, an old friend of her late husband, stood and shook her hand warmly. "You still have that same calm," he said, "but there's fire underneath, isn't there?" She smiled faintly. Maybe there always was. For the next hour they reviewed everything, the shares, the trusts, the clauses that gave her full control now that her husband had passed. By the time she left, she had signed papers transferring funds to her private account and updated ownership under her sole name. Walking out of that office, Margaret didn't just feel powerful, she was powerful. That evening, she returned home to find Eric waiting at her porch. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with frustration, "why didn't you tell me about the property deal? You embarrassed me in front of the agent." Margaret looked at him quietly, then asked, "Why did you tell a stranger I was selling my home?" He hesitated. We thought it'd be better for you. You're alone. You don't need." She cut him off. "Don't finish that sentence." Her voice was low, but sharp. "For years, I watched you make mistakes, and I said nothing. I thought love meant silence. But now I see it only made you weak." Eric's expression shifted from guilt to irritation. "You're overreacting, Mom. You're old, and you don't understand how things work anymore." Margaret took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "Don't ever call me old like it's an insult. I built this home with your father. I survived more than you could ever imagine. And if you think I'll let anyone take what's mine, you're wrong." For the first time in his life, Eric was speechless. He tried to speak again, but she turned away. "You should go," she said quietly, "and tell your wife that the next time she sends someone to my door, I'll have the police waiting." Eric stared at her, stunned. "You'd really do that to your own son?" She looked at him with tears forming, not of sadness, but of release. "I already did worse, Eric. I raised you to believe money matters more than people. That was my mistake. I'm just fixing it now." She closed the door gently, leaving him standing on the porch. Inside, the old clock ticked steadily, each sound like a heartbeat returning to life. Margaret leaned against the door, letting out a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not because someone was protecting her, but because she was finally protecting herself. She didn't know what came next. Maybe loneliness, maybe freedom. But she knew one thing for certain: no one would ever silence her again. The next morning dawned with a quiet kind of peace that Margaret hadn't felt in years. The house, once filled with silence that felt like grief, now felt like strength. She moved through the rooms slowly, running her hand over the furniture her husband had built decades ago, every corner of it carrying memories. Not pain anymore, but history. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mr. Bradley. "The transfer is complete. You now own 42% of Suncrest Holdings. Congratulations, Mrs. Baker." She stared at the screen, the reality of it sinking in. 42%. Enough to make her one of the major decision makers in the company. The same company her son and daughter-in-law had gossiped about as a business run by rich, cold people. Now she was one of those people, though. Unlike them, she knew what true wealth meant. That afternoon, she decided it was time to act. She didn't want revenge, not yet. She wanted truth. Margaret called her lawyer and arranged for a formal family meeting at her house the next day. She sent a message to Eric and Lena, simple and polite. "Dinner tomorrow. I have something important to tell you both. Please don't be late." Lena replied first, full of feigned affection. "Of course, Mom, can't wait." Eric's response came minutes later. "Okay, but no drama this time. All right." Margaret smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night, she couldn't sleep. She reread her husband's old letters, the ones he had written when they first decided to hide their wealth. "People change when they see what you have," he had warned her. "Let them love you for who you are, not for what you own." He had been right, and now, after all these years, she understood exactly what he meant. The next day came. The table was set beautifully. her best china, crystal glasses, and a bouquet of lilies from the garden. The atmosphere was warm, deceptive, like the calm before a storm. When Eric and Lena arrived, they were all smiles. Lena wore a new dress, sparkling earrings, both obviously expensive, likely bought with more borrowed money. "Mom, this looks amazing," she said, kissing Margaret's cheek. Margaret returned the smile. "I wanted tonight to be special." Dinner began pleasantly. Margaret served roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and her husband's favorite wine, the same one they had opened on anniversaries. For a while, they talked about ordinary things, the weather, Eric's work, the company gossip. Lena always enjoyed spreading. Then, midway through dessert, Margaret cleared her throat. "I wanted to tell you something," she said softly. The room fell silent. "You both know I've been keeping things simple since your father passed. I thought modesty was enough, but I realize now, hiding too much can hurt just as much as revealing too little." Lena frowned, confused. "What do you mean, Mom?" Margaret reached for a small folder beside her. She placed it gently on the table and opened it. Inside were several documents, bank statements, ownership papers, and an official certificate bearing the gold seal of Suncrest Holdings. Eric's fork froze midair. "What is this?" "This," Margaret said calmly, "is my life's work, or rather, your father's and mine. The company you always joked about, the one you said belonged to cold rich people, is the company your father helped build, and I now own nearly half of it." Lena's eyes widened. "You're kidding. You're rich." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Was that the word you were looking for?" Lena's face turned pale, her usual confidence evaporating. Eric stared, unable to speak. "I never wanted to flaunt it," Margaret continued. "We lived simply because we believed in peace, not greed. But lately, you both have made it clear what money does to people who've never earned it." Lena tried to recover her composure. "We were just worried about you. You live alone. Enough." Margaret interrupted. "You wanted my home. You wanted my safety turned into your comfort, and you did it with smiles on your faces." Eric rubbed his forehead, his voice low. "Mom, you're misunderstanding." "I'm not," she said sharply, "and I'm done being the fool who lets others define her worth." She leaned forward, her tone steady, each word deliberate. "You both will get nothing from me. No inheritance, no apartment, no share. You made your choices when you chose greed over love." The silence that followed was deafening. Lena stood up, face red. "You can't do that. You can't cut us off." Margaret smiled again, this time with genuine amusement. "Oh, but I already have." Eric pushed back his chair. "Mom, please." But Margaret raised a hand, calm and resolute. "Leave, both of you. I hope one day you learn what real value means." They stood there for a moment, realizing the weight of her words. Then, defeated and humiliated, they left. Margaret stayed seated, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't crying. She was free. Outside, she could hear their car engine start, then fade into the distance. The night air flowed through the open window, carrying with it a strange peace, the peace of a woman who had finally chosen herself. Margaret sat quietly in her armchair that night, the same chair where she had spent countless lonely evenings after her husband's death. But tonight was different. The loneliness was gone. In its place was a deep, serene satisfaction, the kind that comes when you finally take your life back from the hands of others. Her phone rang. It was Carlos, her financial advisor. "Mrs. Baker, I wanted to confirm that the media statement has gone out," he said. Margaret frowned. "Media statement?" "Yes, ma'am. Suncrest Holdings released an internal announcement this evening, naming you as one of the new board members. I thought you should know before it hits tomorrow's news." For a moment, she couldn't speak. She hadn't realized the announcement would go public so soon. But as she looked around her modest living room, the faded wallpaper, the worn rug, the photo of her husband smiling beside her, she felt something she hadn't in years. Pride. "Thank you, Carlos," she said softly. "You've done more for me than you know." After the call ended, she poured herself a cup of tea. The news would spread like wildfire in the morning, she thought. And then, she smiled faintly. They would know. The next morning, her prediction came true. At 8:15 a.m., the first call came from her neighbor, Mrs. Patel. "Margaret, you're on the news. Are you part of that big company?" "Oh my goodness, you never told me you were that Margaret Baker." Margaret laughed softly. "I suppose I never thought it was worth mentioning." By noon, the phone had rung over a dozen times. Reporters, friends, distant relatives, everyone wanted a comment, a quote, a reaction. She politely declined every request. And then came the call she had been waiting for. Her son, Mom. Eric's voice was hesitant, careful, almost trembling. We saw the news. I'm sure you did, Margaret replied, her tone neutral. Mom, listen, we made mistakes. Big ones. Lena's been crying all morning. We didn't know, Margaret cut him off gently. Didn't know what, Eric, that I wasn't as helpless as you thought, that I had value only when you could measure it in money. Mom, please, he said, voice breaking slightly. We were stupid. We were desperate. You have to understand. We wanted a better life. Margaret sighed. You had one son. You just didn't see it. There was silence on the other end. Can we come see you? He asked. We want to apologize, in person. Margaret thought for a long moment. Her heart, despite everything, ached for the boy she had raised. But she also knew forgiveness could not erase betrayal. Not today, she said finally. Maybe one day, but not today. She hung up the phone, her hands steady. Outside, sunlight filtered through the curtains, golden and gentle. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, her husband's rose bushes still blooming, the wind carrying the faint scent of lilacs. Life was still beautiful, she thought, maybe even more now. Later that afternoon, as she sat reading, there was a knock on the door. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Patel, holding a small box. This came for you, dear. A courier dropped it off. Margaret thanked her and opened the box slowly. Inside was a sealed envelope and a small velvet pouch. The envelope was from Suncrest's chairman, Mrs. Baker. As a gesture of our appreciation, the board voted to reinstate the community foundation your late husband started. We'd like you to serve as honorary director. Inside the pouch was a delicate gold pendant shaped like a rose, engraved with two initials, M and R. Her eyes filled with tears. Robert's initials, her husband's memory. She held the pendant tightly against her chest, whispering, We did it, love, we really did it. That evening, she sat by the fireplace, feeling the quiet hum of life around her. No shouting, no greed, no pretense, just peace. But destiny had one last surprise. A week later, she received a letter from Eric. His handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places. Mom, we lost the house. Lena left me. I don't blame her, or you. I just wanted to say, I understand now what you were trying to teach me all along. You were never poor, Mom. You were rich in ways I couldn't see. If you can ever forgive me, I'd like to start over. Not as your son who wants things, but as your son who finally wants to learn. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she read it. She folded the letter gently, placing it beside her husband's photo. Maybe one day, she whispered. Then she stood up, walked to her desk, and began writing in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. When people show you their greed, don't hide your strength. When they mistake your silence for weakness, show them grace instead of hate. Because in the end, kindness and truth always come home, and karma never forgets an address. The clock ticked softly, the fire crackled, and for the first time in a long, long while, Margaret Baker felt whole again. Asterisk, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Emotion. There's always another story waiting, one that might just remind you what love, loss, and strength truly mean.